And good morning. This is Michael Bartlett and
New
Merrylin
glasses?
LeBlanc with deep dives with new perspectives. Welcome, Merrylin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Michael. And how about you? I'm
Well,
so happy.
I have to say, like I
The
woke up
news is great today.
this like the last couple of weeks have been kind of like almost like an Aquarian dream in a sense. But I mean, I'm kind of hesitant because I know we have a little bit of awkward astrology coming up, especially around inauguration day and everything, and we don't really kind of know how some of these things are going to play out. But I'm very thankful that even if it is by a slim margin, that the Democrats now will actually have some control and can get some things done that can actually help individuals in our country and the planet in general.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, I didn't look at the ephemeris exactly today, but I know that um, Mercury is on the last degrees of, as we're recording this, on the last degrees of Capricorn. And I can't help but think of the very last degree being, these men convening and conferencing about things. And it seems like a very political degree to me. And, I would say that the American people, and thank you, people, voters in Georgia, thank you, seem to be coming to some rationality, which, and you have Mercury in Capricorn, which is I think very indicative of that sign. I mean, Mercury in Capricorn to me is a very solid thinker, someone who doesn't take far out idea, which is not so much far out ideas and say, but you do. I mean, like if I'm talking about you, Michael, you do actually study and research things that other people might say, really, you believe that? But you're always seeking for some grounded truth. But on Friday we have Mercury in Aquarius, my
We
sign.
do. Well, I
My
mean, just
Mercury.
to step back, I mean, yeah, I want to definitely we're going to talk about Mercury and Aquarius, but just to step back a second, I think what helps me is my Mercury is conjunct Venus in Capricorn, trining Uranus and Pluto in Virgo, and Jupiter in Taurus. So while there is a certain groundedness in the way I approach things, well, plus I'm a Sag rising and I'm an Aquarian sun, I have this interesting blend of outer inner um, grounded and idealism, and it's I have to say it's a very interesting mix.
Well, it makes for some, I think, some greater understanding of reality as well, because
Yeah.
just to be focused totally, on rational, solid, what's in front of your eyes sort of thing, can be very deceptive.
Yes. My dad used to have a saying. He said, believe nothing of what you hear and only half of what you see. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. I mean, what's interesting, about with Mercury, Mercury's been in Capricorn. Everyone's been hanging out in Capricorn for a while now. Mercury is like the brother. He's the psychopomp who can like visit everyone. He can visit, Pluto down in the underworld. He can visit Jupiter up in the heavens, and here with us mortals on the planet. And so, I think it's so neat. Usually, when we've been seeing these changes in signs, it's almost like Mercury's gone ahead a little bit, but this time Saturn and Jupiter have gone ahead. So Mercury's kind of catching up to find out like what's the news. What are brothers, Jupiter and brother Jupiter and father Saturn thinking and doing now that they're in Aquarius, that Mercury can kind of go and like kind of chew on a little bit, because at the end of this month Mercury is going to go retrograde, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, a matter of fact, this Friday, going into Aquarius, a week from Friday, it's going to go into its retrograde zone. It's not going to be retrograde yet, but there's a whole section of the zodiac when Mercury is retrograde that it goes over, from our perspective here on the planet, it goes over 3 different times. And next, a week from Friday, which is what, the 15th, it's going to start to enter that zone, and whatever, happens in our communications, in our business transactions, in our travels, but I'd say mostly with COVID in our communications, the emails, the Zooms, the texts, the whatever, the bills you thought you paid, etc. Something in that area is going to be revisited when Mercury goes retrograde on the 30th, and near the end of the sign, I think it's the 27th, 28th degree, or no, 27th degree of Aquarius, the violets in an old pottery. This is the Sabian symbol for that. And then it's going to go back over the same area, and it's called the shadow zone because some things that happen in shadows aren't always clear, but they do sometimes find light. And for each of us, that light will be unique to our personal interactions, because Mercury is considered a personal sign. So it has a lot to do with our relationships. The first relationships that it deals with in our lives are our siblings, and the interactions. And there's an astrologer, an Australian astrologer, Brian Clark? Yes. Who one of his earliest books was this. He's written several others since. Is the sibling constellation, and it's all about Gemini and Mercury and our siblings, and points out that often, if we have siblings, some people do not, they have cousins though, or maybe they don't even have that, then they're a little bit different from most of us. But often we're more influenced by our siblings and cousins than we are by our parents. So, I mean, in terms of our whole socialization process, siblings play an important role, and hence Mercury plays an important role in terms of Mercury and its place in your chart, and the connection to the other planets can tell us volumes about our early socialization process.
Sometimes they're hard to get out.
Yeah.
Mercury, here we are.
Mercury, here we are. So are there special things that you're going to pay attention to when it enters this shadow zone this coming Friday?
Well, what I notice is, it'll get up to 26 degrees of Aquarius, and then it zooms back to 11 degrees.
I know that you look at this differently. I always look at it because the degrees start with 0.
Yeah.
I'm
looking at just simply the degrees of the sign. So I'm just saying it gets up to 26 degrees of Aquarius on the 29th of January.
Yeah, it's 26. Let me explain this for anybody that doesn't understand the astronomy here. It's 26 degrees and several minutes. And since the degrees start at 0, when we're talking about them, like especially when we're using the symbols, we're actually talking about the 27th degree. But the actual, degree, actually, I wrote it down. It goes retrograde at 26 degrees, 29 minutes. So, it's not like 26 and 0 minutes, it's plus. And that's why, because when something is at 26, say, and 0 minutes, in the symbolic system, like the Sabians and others, they'll say, well, consider that then the 26th degree. But once it starts adding on minutes, it's the 27th degree. And that's because it begins at 0, not at 1. So you're going to, I'm just saying this for a novice astrologer or someone who is not listening to us. The reason we're saying these different things is we're looking at it differently.
And my point of just saying like how it's going is what I like is when I see a planet go all the way into a sign and then kind of back up halfway into it. And then and Mercury's to me always like a planet that's preparing us for things. You know, in February on the 19th, there's going to be a stellium in Aquarius. So, you know, I think we're getting prepared for this understanding, and maybe, you know, there might be a little more, like you said, you know, there might be a little more isolation. A lot of people are depending upon their emails and Zoom and their cell phones to be able to connect. And this might be a time where we have solar flares that come up, or maybe there's a way that congregations, because Aquarius also rules groups and organizations, you know, so maybe congregants of a church or a belief structure or an organization may find new ways of meeting with one another. It's wintertime here for most of us, you know, here in the north, in the northern hemisphere, so it's not like a really optimum time to be meeting outside together and everything, but I think we're going to have to find some way to maintain our human connection with one another. And as you know, this year, the Mercury is going retrograde in all three of the air signs. So I think this is a major, I think this is a major rethinking, a restructuring, a reconnecting. All the air signs have to do with how we relate to other, right? How we relate to our mental structure and our processing and our understandings of things, as well as how we interact with one another on developmentally different levels. Like you said with Gemini, that's about siblings. You know, Libra is typically about meeting other, not necessarily your lover. And then Aquarius is like how all of that fits into sort of organizational wholes and how they work together, creating an understanding and a synthesis about how society works. And I think what, you know, especially after the last 4 years that have gone on, seeing democracy dismantled and taken apart, it's going to be very interesting to see how not only is it rebuilt, but what parts are rebuilt and what parts get tossed.
Right. One of the things about Aquarius that is starting this retrograde year in air signs, it is that it does look for ways to improve. So, you know, consequently, we find innovations. And what is so exciting for, you know, as we started this show with the Senate results that are coming out in the news today, what is so exciting is the possibility of some new structuring that's going to be supportive of us, because we're going to be in this isolating situation at least through this to the summer, and we'll be lucky if beyond the summer we can start congregating uh, person to person more. One of the closest indicators, I know Joe Biden had promised that within 100 days he would have the schools open, and I know there's some studies that have come out that said younger children are less at risk, not that they are not at risk, but less at risk. So how that is done, if in fact it is done, is going to be, I think, one of the first indicators of this group energy that the air sign is supporting in terms of making, you know, coming up with ways of having us be able to interact more freely. And you know, you mentioned like we have all these planets in right now, Jupiter and Saturn in um, Aquarius, and that Mercury is going to meet up with those planets. And you know, like Mercury and Jupiter, I often think of them as, I mean, all of these mythologically are related. They're all like this totally dysfunctional family in modern day psychological terms. But you know, the two of them play huge roles, not only well in doing magical things, and some of it for their own well-being. I mean, both of them are tricksters in their own way. We see in the myths of Jupiter, we've seen Jupiter, you know, change form to a horse, to this or that, to have what he wanted. Usually it's to have sex. But but Mercury is considered more
Hermaphroditic.
hermaphroditic, yes. My tongue twisting today. Um, And so you don't hear those kinds of tricks, but there are tricks of getting what he wants, oh, I'd love to have that animal over there, so let's see how I can do that. And I'd love to have access to this particular area, let's see how I can do that. And sometimes the tricks are not totally lawful, but with Jupiter comes back and says, all right, yes, forgive me. Because Jupiter, you know, kind of has this sense. In astrology, we look at jurisprudence as being under Jupiter's rule. Jupiter adheres to the laws and the oaths. He
It's
stayed,
morality,
huh?
like a morality.
Well, I wouldn't say he's very moral though, because
No,
he
but I
really.
mean, but I think in theory, in theory, I mean, that's what's so funny about him, and as well as all of them. I mean, there's always that wonderful dichotomy of, do as I say, not as I do, right? And
Right.
they're like, and he's like the Jupiter, and Jupiter's like the prime example of that. He's always setting up rules for all of his brothers and sisters and his cousins and nieces, nephews, and grandchildren, but doesn't apply to him. So when you get Mercury and Jupiter together, yeah, I mean, it's you don't know what's going to get pulled out of the hat.
Exactly. And Mercury and Saturn are an interesting combination, partly because they both have a lot to do with creativity. Not that Jupiter doesn't. Jupiter gives us lots of ideas about what to work on, but the two of without Saturn, we manifest nothing on this physical plane. It's this concrete energy that has to do with bringing about things, and part of that is wrapped up in the whole law of karma as well. That we all end up often we end up manifesting our karma as well as those things we desired to manifest. And karma can be, karma can be horrible or it can be actually wonderful. So it rides the spectrum. um but the two together can be an extremely creative time for us. And again, because of the group energy of Aquarius, as well as Saturn, I would say Mercury is a more personal planet, but the two together just make me think that the coming year is going to be, at least in terms of ideas put forward, one of the most creative for this country. We think of ourselves as creative beings here on the planet. And I would hope that, some of our creativity leads to more humanitarian establishing, being concerned about not just not just Americans getting the vaccine, and hopefully that handles the contagious uh, element of COVID, but also how can we help the rest of the world get vaccinated if this is what we need to control this pandemic?
And
So,
that's what I love about Jupiter there in Aquarius, because I always think of Jupiter in Aquarius as like the big mind, because there's a big mind in this. There's a big humanitarianism. It's also the esoteric ruler of Aquarius with the traditional ruler. So there's this almost thing in this father and son too. So it's, Jupiter and Saturn. It's this way, and I mean, I think there are things when they're working together, which is what's really exciting again about what happened in Georgia, because it's like we now will have a unified executive and legislative branch that will be able to work towards having something that makes a difference, as opposed to just this infighting that goes on, and elected officials who are coming away with millions and millions more dollars in their bank accounts, but the American people aren't in any better place. And to be honest, like I'm glad you said something about with other countries. I mean, the truth is, a lot of other countries are dealing with these similar issues as well, and finding ways. Like what's going on with Brexit right now. They finally were able to reach some sort of an agreement about how they're going to interact with the EU, and um, that's the interesting thing, I think, with Aquarius, right? It's this very individualized self, and it's just very much about the collective. So understanding that we are actually a little more like the wheels in an old-fashioned clock, that we are, each of us is a gear working towards something that isn't just about what we're wanting on a personality level, but what actually the collective is actually working towards. I mean, I personally, I believe there's a larger goal here. And while there are frustrating periods like the last 4 years, my sense is that there is an inevitability about another time coming where there is a shift in these kind of things, but that doesn't preclude the shadow aspects of humanity continuing to remain as that gets worked out by the population.
Yeah. Oy.
How's that for an Aquarian stream of thought?
Great. Yeah, I was just thinking too, though, that like this talking about Mercury going retrograde and also just this end of this week entering its shadow zone. And so even when it goes direct in March, it's gonna still go back over this. And it's gonna be meeting Jupiter and Saturn, what, 3 times, 2 times, three times. I didn't really check the ephemeris for exactly how that pans out, but that that implies some putting out of ideas and then rethinking the ideas, and then considering all the ramifications. And I mean, if there was ever a time that we needed Mercury retrograde, I think this is the time.
And what's
And
really cool about it is it's bringing, it gives the opportunity to review things. I mean, each one of these, each time that Mercury makes that connection with each of the planets, it's a new birth period, right? Every time a planet comes back into a new moon phase, it's a rebirthing. And so these are new opportunities. These are new ways, okay, bringing new ideas into the collective. That's Mercury in Aquarius, especially with Saturn and Jupiter. And for whatever reason, I keep thinking of almost like a sewing machine. It's like it takes the ideas from the outer and stitches them into the inner, when there's inner planets and outer planets working with one another. It's like there's something that comes in from the outer thing and it goes boom and it hits you in the head. I like to think about the law of possibilities. Like, you hear one thing from a friend and you go, oh, that's kind of interesting. But then you talk to another friend who's completely unrelated to that friend and they say the exact same thing to you. That's when I say, okay, I pay attention. But then when I say the third time, it's like, pay attention the third time, otherwise the universe is going to slap you upside the head. But, that's also, I think, this retrograde period too. It's like this way it brings things in. And then, anyone who sews, you need to have a knot. You need to have something that anchors it. And I think that's the starting point and the ending point of the retrograde cycle and that's why that shadow period, it's like it sits there like a needle on a record. It's like, no, pay attention to this. Right?
Yeah, you just gave a contemporary view of the Greek myth in the Odyssey, and I can't remember the names of the character, but she's knitting a shawl, saying that when I finish the shawl, I'll choose one of you to be, because her husband hasn't come back and she's waiting for him. But every night she undoes. She unravels what she's knitted. It is a going back, but it's also a going back. It's going into that limpid zone, that area of that we like, the dream state.
Like we talked about last time, the liminal state.
Right, it's liminal, yes, and it's Mercury, is the cycle pump who leads souls into the other world, or the underworld. And so in some ways, each of us is getting a taste of that. It might be in our dreams. It might be, in moments where, wait a minute, I was looking at that a week ago and I thought, I thought I came to a different conclusion than I'm coming to now. I mean, those are those moments that we really need to capture if we're journaling or something, that are important, actually, in terms of our understanding of who we are, not just as this physical being here, but a being that's representative of the soul's desire for an earthly experience, that we're spirits having an earth, as they say, having an earth existence.
But I love what you say. I think the journaling, I think for people it is really going to be important to write. If you have a blog, to blog and share your ideas and your thoughts. What's the experience? What I think is very interesting right now is the proliferation of voices that we can connect into nowadays, right? Through the internet, through the whole spectrum of humanity, getting to see people on YouTube, getting to see people on TikTok, getting to see people on all these various social medias. So it's like, write, do things that get your expression out. I agree with you, Merrylin. It's like, I think this is such a creative opportunity. Those of us who have ideas about wanting to get something out in the world or launching like websites. I mean, like what you just did, I mean, perfect timing, right? To get these grand ideas, these grand thoughtfulness. I'm involved. I don't know if you know of a woman named Stormy Gray. She's starting a thing called YouTube Free Astrology. And so she's doing this thing where she's getting some kind of Kickstarter fundraising that's working out really well with it. And a few of us have offered our time and energy for teaching free with the idea of educating 10,000 people in astrology.
Wow.
Free. So it's a really, that's to me an Aquarian ideal, right? That's that big mindedness. And at first I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to give something a free, but the truth is like having more people understand what astrology is, understanding that it's a roadmap and a guide to, like if you were to look at a map and say, oh, I'm going to encounter a rainstorm over here and a thunderstorm over here, and maybe I should wait for my trip and leave another day. If people can understand that that's the benefit astrology gives people, I mean, what a different way. And then also the acceptance of the different archetypes we each have, right? Understanding that we're all square pegs trying to fit into a round hole.
Yeah, basically with Mercury retrograde, I get less disturbed by hangups. As there I go, well, Mercury's retrograde, and I guess there's something to consider here. And wait, timing isn't right, but whatever. It subdues, for me, it often subdues my emotional states. That's one of the factors. One of the other factors too, just looking, I'm thinking about how Dane Rudyard had looked at the Mercury retrograde cycle and its combination with the sun in terms of different types of mental personalities, as well as I look at it more as even within a transit. Like, for example, when Mercury goes retrograde, it's what Rudyard would have called an epimethean Mercury. And there's a direct epimethean Mercury and a retrograde epimethean Mercury. The direct starts with the conjunction that the sun and Mercury have when Mercury's at the far side of the sun, and epimethean comes from the myth about Epimetheus and his brother Prometheus, and he was more of a hesitant kind of person in terms of jumping into things without first considering what has the past taught us about that kind of activity or that kind of behavior. And so with the retrograde epimethean that we're going to enter when Mercury goes retrograde, and they're not going to go retrograde but until the 20th of February. So we've got a good 3 weeks before it goes retrograde. It's right now in the epimethean direct stage, where anything that we do that's a little different, or even, given COVID and the restrictions that are here, if there's something out of the ordinary, I mean, like not just going to the grocery store, but where you have to go to a business or leave your home and do something unusual, you can't do it on the internet. Really think about how you're going to do that. That's what the epimethean Mercury is saying to us. Whereas when the retrograde cycle starts on the 20th. It's still that looking at, having hindsight, looking at what has happened. But I'm an Epimethean person, but it's also, it almost feels Promethean because there is this kind of flashes of ideas come, and Rudyard even said this. Sometimes you think of the retrograde Epimethean as Promethean because it has a highly intuitive quality to it, and it's like trusting those intuitive thoughts. Now, then the Sun and Mercury will meet up while it's retrograde, and this is considered the beginning of a new phase. And when planets are retrograde, they're closest to the Earth, and that's why that's considered that way, because there's two conjunctions that the Sun and Mercury have, and because of the orbit of Mercury, which is very close to the Sun, it never appears farther than 28 degrees from the Sun. And so with this Promethean one that will start later in the cycle, there's this kind of, it's like a new moon quality. There's an energetic thrust to do things. And I would imagine, if just bringing these cycles up and bringing the conditions, I would imagine that, for example, we would have an administration who has come up with ways of getting the vaccine to more people. And there may be some freeing up of things, or perhaps maybe this is the time when kids go back to school. It's sort of, there's this kind of fresh energy. And you think about the Prometheus and the myth where Prometheus, gave the fire to the humans, even though Zeus or Jupiter did not want that to happen. Right. But there's always, there's kind of a freedom giving action that goes on there. And without it, hey, that's a great idea, and do it.
Very Aryan in a way too, right? There's an innocence to it, because it's like, well, why wouldn't people want fire?
Right.
It's also, and in that sense, very humanitarian. It's interesting when you were talking about the Epimethean retrograde, it's almost like it felt like it's like someone who's just like really very energetically present. And when you're energetically present, it's real easy to receive in the moment whatever one needs to respond to life, right? Like when I think of like psychic abilities, because I always think of Mercury, to me, is a very good indicator of people's psychic abilities and their sensitivities depending on what's going on with it. And the retrograde cycle of it is so extraordinary, because these are individuals who automatically think very differently than the collective. Do you have a Mercury retrograde?
Yes.
Yeah.
And right. I also have a Venus retrograde. I'm less than 10% of the population. And I also have a blood type that's less than 10% of the population.
You are very unique, Maid.
Somehow, I don't know what that is. Maybe it's because, I get these thoughts and then I can't express the word. No, I'm sorry.
No, and it's so interesting, as you and I, and it's always fun because we have such an interesting different way that we access information, but we have a similar pool of information. Maybe, is that the right way to say it? I don't know, like we visit the same places, but we perceive it in our own ways. Sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah. For
different reasons, yes.
Right.
Yeah, and perception is definitely part of that. Yes. 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 Yeah, it's sort of like I frequently go off on tangents. And in my mind, there's a reason for other people to go, what the?
My partner, Ridge, I'll start talking, and then all of a sudden and I'm really enjoying the story, and I'll look over at him and he just has this dead glazed look over his head. And I'm like, oh God, I lost him again.
Where's his Mercury? Is it a retrograde or?
He has it conjunct his north node in Aquarius, so
Oh,
he's
okay.
having
All
an
right.
Aquarian return, a Mercury return, which is another new phase. I mean, so that what that means, just so we're continuing to educate people, of course, is where Mercury has gone, any planet where it's gone all the way around in its orbit and has gone back to the same place where it is in your birth chart. That's called a return. And
Right.
that again is very much a new beginning. It usually, depending on each of the planets, creates a new cycle or new kind of like new rules of engagement, right? It's like getting to graduate from junior high and high school or whatever the different grades are with each planet and going on to the next level, but still continuing to work on that theme in the way that's in relationship
Yeah.
to yourself.
Well, when Mercury returns to the sun, well, this Mercury is retrograde. They meet at the 21st degree, that's 20 plus, of Aquarius. And it's a degree that's a little disturbing for me. Actually, it's the midpoint of my Mercury and Sun. And it's symbolized by a woman disillusioned in love. And there's something also very mercurial about, well, no, it's actually very Venusian about that degree, not, but it's a Venus Mercury connection, as well as solar in this case. And I mean, I looked, that's the Sabian symbol. I looked at Martin Goldsmith's symbol for it because sometimes he has something that's more fitting, but it's still somebody who's reflecting on a broken romance. And her lover shows up at the door and she tells her maid to tell him to go away. um and it's a symbol. Okay.
I just
So
saw that with Trump in my mind, right?
thank you. See, I was kind of like, where is this?
Because what is he doing? He's going around going, hey, you guys, you still love me, right? You still love me. Where are those votes?
Oh gosh, because I was very concerned about this, and I thought,
Well, I mean, I think you still can be, because I mean,
yeah,
we're talking about rejection, right? He's now
yeah,
realizing that the love affair doesn't go as deeply as he wanted it to. And I mean, and I'm sorry to say this, but I mean, with the sort of energetic system he has, it's very much about, as long as people are adoring him. Clinton, to be honest, had a very similar energetic thing, and the thing of like really needing that sort of adoration, that kind of attention. He ran it a little differently, of course, but I mean, but what the bottom line is the idea of rejection, alienation, and isolation is very instinctually devastating to these individuals. And so the
oh,
trouble is, what will that elicit in him as he continues to realize that the doors are being shut on him? And not only is he not getting to talk to those who used to answer him, but he's talking to the help.
well, in some ways too, you're talking about the opposite sign of Aquarius, Leo, and Trump being a Leo rising with Mars and Leo, and Clinton was a Leo sun. And Leo needs that adoration, aside from the psychological states that
Each are in.
that each are in. That Leo needs that adoration from others. It seeks it constantly, that affirmation of, yes, you are a creative being, and
It needs the air, right? I mean, that fire needs to be fed. And so as long as it's being fluffed, as long as it's, the billows are going, and it's interesting, because the truth is, you hear about the scenes behind the scenes about Trump, and the same thing with Clinton. I mean, they were just, I mean, just nonstop energy, right? Their energies, their motor's always running, and they need someone to bounce it off. Clinton's a little bit better at like kind of integrating and synthesizing. Trump is like, okay, whatever the last thing he heard is what's present in his head. It's like the little bee that's buzzing in his ear. Oh, I'm going to talk about bees right now because that's what's buzzing in my head.
well, Michael, this has been a delight. on a wonderful day, even if we still have COVID and we're in isolation and doing this on Zoom instead of in person.
Exactly. I'm so happy to have the connection. So if you're interested in reaching me, you can go to my website, coremichael.com, or my cell phone is 505-690-3860.
And you can always reach me, Merrylin, at moonwiseastrology.com, which has my email, marylinleblanc@gmail.com, or moonwise at ksfr.org, where Moonwise Public Radio here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Been doing Moonwise on it for over 20 years. And you can go back and listen to many of the podcasts. The early years we weren't doing podcasts, but I think we started around 2013, 2014, once a week. So there's plenty of podcasts there. Moonwise.libsyn.com for those.
Perfect. And if you like our website, if you like our talk here, please hit like, hit subscribe, share with your friends, comment, email us questions, comments. There's a lot to talk about this year. I'm really excited to continue our deep dives with new perspectives, Merrylin. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Turning out to be a really good one at the beginning. Bye-bye.
Sure, bye.